Sometimes when we begin to question our faith or have doubts about our tradition, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert. When we take a step back and honestly evaluate organized religion in the 21st century, many times it doesn't make any sense. The more we cling to it and try to save it, the worse it becomes. In addition, widespread abuse, cover-ups, and victim shaming cause some of us to question whether it will ever be right again.
The Desert Sanctuary was created by Karl and Laura Forehand. It consists of a podcast, a blog, along with Karl and Laura's writing.
We're happy you're here. Welcome to the show.
Hi, everybody out there, and welcome to the Desert Sanctuary. Missing today is Laura, which makes this a whole lot less interesting when she's not here. But thankfully, we have a guest today that I've been waiting to talk to for a while. I'm really excited that he's here, and we're just going to have a conversation today after introduction. But today, Jim Palmer, say hello.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So Jim Palmer is an author, activist, speaker, spiritual director, and professor, chaplain with the American Humanist Association, and leading figure in the non-religious spirituality movement. Palmer received his Master of Divinity from Trinity Divinity School in Chicago, where he served as a pastor at the megachurch Willow Creek Community Church. He was later the founding and senior pastor of Springbrook Community Church in Nashville, Tennessee in 2000. Palmer left professional Christian ministry and began chronicling the journey of shedding religion to find God. And so, like I said, welcome to the program. Your latest book is called Inner Anarchy, Dethroning God and Jesus to Save Ourselves and the World. So, very provocative title, something I'd love to talk about. But first, why don't you just tell us your story in whatever detail you want to, in whatever way you want to. Laura and I think it's our job just to listen and to hear your story and believe it. So tell us about yourself.
Well, what happened is, we've heard that phrase before, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me just, the Cliff Notes version is that I grew up in I had a very chaotic, traumatic childhood. And my senior year in high school, I became friends with the guy on our football team who was a Christian and basically led me to Christ. This was, I was just ready to graduate from high school. So I go to college, did my undergrad at Eastern State University, was going to play football there, but because of a serious injury, I was kind of had to end my football career, but went there anyway to attend school as a new Christian. And I ran into, by happenstance, the director of the Campus Crusade for Christ Ministry in the Student Center, and he invited me out to one of the Campus Crusade for Christ meetings, which I attended and became heavily involved with that student group. Mm-hmm. I kind of learned in that experience, that I had a fairly strong personality. I was a leadership-oriented person, was okay with speaking, and that was enough to become our student body president, and did some traveling overseas, doing some short-term projects and this kind of thing. And then my senior year in college, a gentleman was running an advertisement on the radio about him planting or starting an evangelical free church. And I would listen to the radio and went to attend one of the meetings and became friends with him. And it was through my friendship with that church planting pastor that inspired me to go to seminary. And I went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School That's where I got my MDiv. That's where I discovered Willow Creek, went on staff at Willow Creek Community Church. And then I was one of a handful of people that were then sent off to different parts of the country to plant other seeker-targeted churches, which I did in Nashville. It was a successful church. And but I got to a point where I started recognizing some things that were concerning to me. Like, I started noticing that a lot of the problems that I often saw people encountering in our church community didn't seem to really be getting any better. Relationship problems, addiction problems, just basic unhappiness with life kind of thing. It seemed like that a lot of these problems persisted, in my pastoral counseling work and so on. I kind of started to see this. And then when I took a look in the mirror, I realized, well, I'm not sure that I also don't seem to be having the freedom and the peace and the well-being and the wholeness that I so confidently proclaim every Sunday morning with my kind of bulletproof evangelical theology that I learned in seminary. So I ultimately decided to walk away from church ministry, and because I began to question, why is this? Why does this not work? Why is this message not really changing people's lives? Why hasn't it changed my own life? Why do I live with a lack of peace and anxiety? And so I resigned as pastor. I left church ministry. And it wasn't too long after that, I started writing about my journey, out of religion. The first book, Divine Nobodies, Shedding Religion to Find God and the Unlikely People Who Help You. So that was my first book. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of continued writing books as my journey kind of progressed and I began to change. And like you mentioned, this last one was Inner Anarchy. And I did get into a lot of trouble with that subtitle, Dethroning God and Jesus to Save the World. I was heavily discouraged not to use that subtitle, but I'm stubborn is one of my, my lack of patience and my stubbornness are two qualities that I need to work on. But, but I chose that subtitle because the basic idea of the book is that the way the way evangelical Christianity, the way theism typically conceptualizes ultimate reality is problematic, and the way that the Christian religion presents Jesus to the world is also problematic. And so, in other words, the book is encouraging that the kind of real inner anarchy that we need is a willingness to question our entire notion of God and even Jesus, kind of in defiance of what we typically hear from the Christian religion about these two, beliefs, this kind of theological edifice of evangelicalism. So let me turn this. So, and that was the last book that I wrote. So along the way, over those years, a lot has happened. Like you mentioned in the bio, I started the National Humanist Association. I became a chaplain with the American Humanist Association. I founded the Center for Non-Religious Spirituality and started training spiritual directors that will work in the space of non-religious spirituality. And over the years, I've done adjunct teaching in areas such as ethics and philosophy, comparative religion, that sort of thing. And for a period of time, kind of dabbled in the interfaith movement. So it's, I guess, as a bottom line, in terms of where I am currently, is that I believe that spirituality is a universally significant and applicable aspect of the lived human experience, and that that if you look across the spectrum of religion, philosophy, secular belief systems, science, that there tends to be a consensus about some things where, and we're getting stuck because we use different language for it. I mean, that's not true entirely. I mean, monotheistic religions have a pretty well-defined belief system that's probably not going to allow much, latitude in terms of beliefs. But, I do have some misgivings about any kind of exclusivity in terms of a religious tradition kind of claiming a sort of superior view about ultimate reality. I think that if you kind of step back, you can see the common denominators, and maybe that's worth building on rather than arguing some of the distinctions that different groups find meaningful for themselves. So and then, over the course of doing this for a lot of years, it obviously involves working with people who have encountered spiritual abuse, religious trauma syndrome, or RTS is kind of the clinical term that's often used now for people who have been victimized or traumatized through their involvement in religion. I've developed some courses. I do a lot of spiritual direction around this kind of thing. And so that's a little bit of, I guess, what my journey has been.
Yeah, so the automatic pushback that people give, our book is called Out into the Desert, Thriving Outside of Organized Religion. So there's a definite push there, something we want people to evaluate, and we just wrote about it like we were evaluating it. But the pushback is, well, Karl, I'm sorry you had that experience, but my experience is different. And one person said to me the other day, I've never seen trauma in organized religion. And my automatic thought was, you're probably the one that's creating it, and causing it. But so my question kind of is, obviously I'm moving away from organized religion with a creed because like you said, that once you draw a circle around what you believe, what you're going, you start defending it, and you stop growing, you stop evolving, you stop learning. That's my theory. Doesn't have to be everybody's. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that you're right. Well, it's true that every person's experience of anything is unique to them, including religion. So I did get to a point where I had to, and these days I kind of qualify my use of the word religion and often refer to it as toxic religion. It's true that none of us should think that our experience of religion is representative of every person's experience of religion on the one hand. And then also we have to keep in mind, in terms of language and linguistics, that the word religion is sort of fallen out of favor, particularly in the West, when there was a time when the word religion was almost synonymous with the word spirituality. Like William James and others who wrote about this would often use the word religion. Like if someone was reading that today, they would probably plug something into it that wasn't intended. So there's that. But on the other side of the coin, some aspects of religious damage or trauma is because when we think of trauma, we tend to think of a sort of like a traumatic event or traumatic experience. Like if you served in the armed forces and you have, you've been affected by PTSD. Some of that probably relates to actual combat experiences that were very traumatic, and were impacted you in your sense of personhood and your psychological framework and so on. So the thing about toxic religion that's so traumatizing is that it operates on a set of premises that are sabotorial towards a person's wholeness and well-being. Like, for example, if you could run through, you could run through a lot of the top beliefs of your sort of average evangelical Christian, which is that you're born bad, you're a sinner, that left to yourself, you're a filthy rag and worthless. In fact, you're so bad that the only remedy that was acceptable was that God had to, brutally kill his only child. That's just how bad you are.
Right.
So it kind of starts with this idea of your badness and then moves on from there to sabotage your relationship with yourself. You can't be trusted. Your heart is wicked. Lean not on your own understanding, lean on God's. You can't trust what you feel. You're an untrustworthy person. And then you kind of mix in a good dose of fear of God's punishment, fear of the lack of God's blessing, fear of God's disapproval, the kind of performance-based, even churches that talk a lot about grace, there still often is underlying a sort of performance-based idea, the things that you must do in order to, be a recipient of God's favor. And of course, all of this is happening beneath the big thread, which is that if you were to mess up too bad, depending on that Christian denomination's definition of this, then you could be sent to eternal conscious torment, which would be hell. So the threat of that is often creates some of the neuroses. Imagine being a child at one of these evangelistic campaigns and hearing the preacher, talk about the horrors of being cast into the darkness of eternal conscious torment and the gnashing of teeth and all this sort of thing, and or your loved ones and so on. And that doesn't even begin to sort of unpack the pathological idea that there's a God who loves us so much that he would brutalize and kill his own son, and that he loves us so much that in order to protect his holiness, he would be okay with banishing people to eternal conscious torment. So the mixing of the message with love and punishment is pathological. This is how cults start, right? The religious leader speaks of how much they love the group, and yet the religious leader requires, obedience. The community thrives on punishment and reward for the people that are good, according to whatever that means in that particular cult group or whatever. So those are a few ways that, and women particularly, I think, are affected by this differently, or they're uniquely damaged by toxic religion because of the way that toxic religion diminishes a person who is a woman, who is female. And there's evidence of this throughout many ways, throughout the history of Christianity, the Pauline epistles. There's other places where we kind of find traces of this. Now, I have to be, at the same time, it's not like it's true that organized religion is often very patriarchal and very demeaning and dismissive of women, but it's not done any great favors for men either in terms of, sitting under these kinds of teachings.
Toxic masculinity is real big in the restless reform, right? Yeah. So there's a preacher named Sarah Bessey. I don't know if you know Sarah.
I don't think so.
She, a few years ago, I heard her speak, and she said, my biggest deal was the church didn't have room for my, and I've thought about that statement for 3 years now. The church didn't have room for my grief. And when we look at, spiritual institutions, religious institutions, and so on, once they're organized and become organized religion, have a creative belief system, and they are an organization. And something I see as true about those things is that the organization always comes first. And like 70% of our effort and our money is going to maintaining the building, paying the salaries, and putting on the show. And so we do that. And I say that as a former pastor like you that used to do that. And we end up with very little time because, especially if we're evangelistic means we're postured towards the new person coming in. And we spend a lot of the extra time on that as people are hobbling out the other door. But a lot of it is because there's no time for that person that's in the pew. And they with that, you see.
It's an unfortunate aspect of toxic religion is a failure to address a person completely, like, for example, to have an adequate way of addressing or speaking about or resourcing mental health, encouraging mental health practices, right? Like you can't pray everything out of existence. You can't Bible verse everything into well-being. I mean, there is a mental health field. There are, a person is a body, a mind, a personality, a set of life experiences that has conditioned and impacted them. So I think the church often isn't very capable of meeting people where they're at in that sense as a whole person, particularly, their mental health. And I know that often in the church world, there is a lack of authentic and meaningful relationship. Like I know that I sometimes referred to it as meeting-based relationships. We show up for Sunday school or the small group, we do our Bible study, this kind of thing. We go home and then we come back the next week and we do it again. And those are kind of like meeting-based relationships. And there's also a tremendous pressure, I think, in a lot of religious groups to maintain the appearance of devotion, happiness, being spiritual, a lack of transparency about depression or unhappiness or mental health challenges. It's for a lot of people, the church is the last place where they would share something like that because it could be viewed as a sign of immaturity or disobedience or, this kind of thing. So I think that just getting back to fundamentals on teaching people what it means to be in vigorous and mutually beneficial relationship with each other, years and years ago, Wayne Jacobson wrote a book about one anothering, and do you know who Wayne Jacobson is?
Yeah.
And of course, it's that's been many years, for me since I was kind of connected with those kinds of conversations. But at least in my mind, he was getting there a little bit when he talked about this one anothering. The quality of the relationship between people. The other thing too is that Christianity, organized Christianity, tends to build a dependency on the bureaucracy in the system. Christianity is sort of like discipleship and devotion is measured by the commitment to the organization. how much you attend church, how much you give to the church, are you serving in the church, how often do you attend a small group, and all this kind of thing, so it's very organizational structure dependent, like that's what's being held out as the true measure of devotion, being a member, serving, giving, this kind of thing, as opposed to the idea of Christianity as a decentralized way of living or a way of life, and so, for all those and other reasons, I think that there are some real gaps in people that the church, toxic religious churches aren't creating or fostering dynamics conducive for real human development and personal and spiritual growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have, so at one level, we have things that are extremely, just like you're talking about going to war. Well, in the church, we have event-based things like, people abusing other people directly, physical abuse, all of those kind of things. At the next level, you have those beliefs that you talked about, but there's also a way of doing organized religion that we've been doing for about 1,500 years since Constantine. Where a person stands on an elevated stage and lectures to us, and we do things a certain way, like you've been talking about. So there's several levels of things we got to get through. And so for a lot of us, it was just too much. And we didn't see any progress from the inside. So we stepped outside. And when we wrote this last book about 3 years ago, we were just evaluating. We had stepped back because we're getting in fights on the way home to church every time because Laura was done.
Yeah.
And I was still trying to make my contribution and change it from the inside.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, so we stepped back and evaluated it, and 3 years later, we kind of still feel the same way. Now that we've stepped back, Rob Bell has a podcast about a fish standing next to the ocean. I think that's what it's called, a fish standing on the beach. And so it's this fish evaluating, standing there looking at the ocean that he used to live at. And the thought is, when you're in the water that you're swimming in, it's hard to see what's going on. And so Cindy Wong Brandt, you may know from progressive parenting and so on, she challenged us to take a year off, and that is the best thing we ever did because we got perspective, right?
Yeah.
We could see the water we were swimming in, and it just wasn't working. And so others have encouraged us to deconstruct so far and dive back into another place in Christianity or whatever. But we've decided to stay apart from it, and we've been growing. We have authentic relationships. We've done healing, we've done counseling work, we've done shadow work, and so on. So we feel like we're moving in the right direction. As with all of your experience with all the counseling and as a pastor and pastoral counseling, and you've kind of taken this journey, what advice would you have for people? Maybe they feel like they've been roughed up a little bit by organized religion. Some of them have been traumatized, or they're just trying to move ahead and go, this is not going anywhere. We come here every day and it's not doing anything for us. What would be kind of some of your general suggestions for people that want to move ahead?
Yeah, it's a good question. Counseling that I do with people who were traumatized by or otherwise left religion has kind of, it revolves around laying a new foundation with respect to your relationship with yourself. like religion is always asking what's your, how's your relationship with God and so on. And I really encourage people to think about laying a new kind of foundation with a new kind of relationship with themselves. Because a lot of people who leave religion, a pattern is, okay, you start kind of seeing the problems. Maybe an event triggers an acute sort of reason for wanting to go ahead and leave the church. You start kind of seeing holes in your theology, maybe you start deconstructing some of your theology. And then, you start looking for something to replace it. Like if these beliefs were wrong, like what's right, and part of this is because unlike presumably, for example, animals don't feel the kind of angst that our human species feels when it comes to like existential matters and existential questions, like presumably animals don't worry about isn't there a God? What happens when you die? What's my purpose and meaning?
Yeah, what's meaning?
And so on, but human Homo sapiens seem kind of played with these existential questions kind of hanging over their head. And I think it's likely to have been, at the very least, an important evolutionary aspect of our species, that our concern about matters that are greater than ourselves on this sort of abstract existential level, when taken into consideration, actually has a great import in terms of the kind of lives that we live. And so, it could have been an important aspect of our evolution, even as a species. Just looking for new answers to the same questions may not be the best route after you live religion. If God's not that, what is God? Okay, if hell's not real, what happens in the afterlife? If the Bible's this, that, it's not just trying to see if you can come up with better answers to the same questions. It's kind of like, all right, let's see what Eckhart Tolle says, or Rob Bell, or whoever, like Richard Rohr, we kind of repeat the same mistake in that we just now try to find another belief system, replace the old one, and then we've got our new gurus, they're just the progressive, different, but it's kind of really the same pattern when you look at it. It's just kind of switching one belief system, one set of beliefs, one guru for another,
I agree.
So one thing to consider is, maybe rather than looking for better answers to the same questions, maybe just consider coming up with a whole different set of questions altogether. Like maybe the most important questions aren't, is there a God? What happens when you die? What is my meaning and purpose in life? And maybe they aren't the most important questions, because all those questions you sort of at least, a little bit implied that the answer is kind of beyond something that you would find in yourself or as yourself, like the meaning of life. Like, how can we think that why do we think that the meaning of life is a thing that we have to discover or find versus seeing ourselves as the meaning makers in the lived human experience, that we greet life and the meaning is made in terms of how we interpret and respond to any moment in life as it unfolds. And how do we know that, let's see, looks like can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. I got another call coming in, but I'm just going to do nothing with it, because last time when I tried to end it, I cut us off. So these existential questions, looking for better answers may not be the way to go. Come up with some different questions. Like, for example, and a lot of the questions I encourage people to consider have a lot to do with their relationship with themselves. And they're simple questions. Because these questions are so simple, they're very difficult to answer often, because people don't even know where to start answering these questions, because they've been told so much in life what the answers are supposed to be that it's hard to get down to the real answers that they have What brings me joy?
Mm-hmm.
What centers me?
Mm-hmm.
What makes me come alive? Where is it in life do I feel a sense of wholeness or peace? I mean, like, I think I wrote out 21 questions in this non-religious spirituality, my life after religion guide for a person to get in touch with, like, what brings me joy, what brings me peace, what centers me, what really matters most to me in life. Where in life do I feel connected to life? I feel whole within myself. Where in life do I seem to be the most authentic? What about the world makes me angry? What is wrong with this world that I'm passionate about, that I want to do something about? Like there's an endless number of questions. And that doesn't even begin to get into, like you mentioned, shadow work. I did some training in Jungian psychology, and the idea of self-actualization, looking at the persona, doing shadow work. I mean, people have very weak relationships with themselves. They've never done that kind of personal work. Mm. If you grew up as a child in religion and you just kept going all the way through, you've maybe done a real minimal amount of work on yourself. And so the most important work a person will ever do is the work they do on themselves, but just because you were religious doesn't necessarily mean you've really done any of that kind of work before. Right. So
some of the PTSD in that area, for so long we've been told what we believe, who we are, what our identity is, and we come to that point and we say, a lot of times we talk with people about the basic questions like you're talking about, like who am I? What do I like to do? And the big question, can I trust myself? Because I was taught not to do that. I was taught not to trust myself. I'm bad, like you talked about before. So don't trust yourself. And is that an inner knowing? Is it? Do you suppose that we have an inner knowing that's a lot stronger than we thought?
Or it's like that quote that says, you can't test courage cautiously, right? Like, if by definition, courage requires a certain willingness to risk, right? You can't cautiously. Okay. So in the same way, you can't learn to trust yourself unless you start trying. For example, like let's say you and it's trial and error in that trusting yourself is a process. So it's kind of like, it's an exploration. It's a thing of discovery. You're exploring. I think the problem is, one of the problems, kind of another underlying problem within toxic religion is how dualistic it is. You're either right or wrong. You're either good or bad. Okay, like there's a lot of shades of good and a lot of shades of bad. And when do you cross the line from good to bad? So people are afraid. What if I trust myself and I'm wrong? Mm-hmm. What if I trust myself and do something and it's bad? Think of it differently. Think of it like this. Are my choices, my decisions, my actions, my habits or whatever, do I experience them as something that is constructive, useful, helpful? Or do I experience them as something that is harmful, destructive, or perhaps didn't produce the outcome I was hoping, so on? Like, a person has to be willing to do trial and error to learn through direct experience. It can't be told what it is. They have to kind of live themselves into it. So if you ask a question, something like, okay, what centers me? And maybe they think, well, I feel a sense of inner peace when, let just, for example's sake, I feel a deep sense of inner peace when I walk that path in the woods. That's what it feels like. And then you go walk the path in the woods, and on Monday and Tuesday, you felt a sense of peace because for some reason that path in the woods, that connection with the natural world sort of opens up a sense of belonging to life itself. Like you're kind of experiencing a sort of, maybe some sort of underlying feeling or something where everything just seems connected and it feels good inside,
Do you use the word authenticity much when you're talking about things like that? Because that becomes really important for me. Does this feel authentic? Does it feel like the real me?
Right. Yeah, I think that would be, because so much of religion is manufacturing something that's not real. So I think it requires a little work for a person to investigate and discover what is really authentic, what is real for me. And so let's say you go out on Monday and you have the experience in nature. You tried it out because you answered the question, where do you feel centered? And you said, walking this path in the woods. You go walking the path in the woods on Monday. It's perfect. You feel centered. Everything's great. You go walk the path on Wednesday and it just sucks entirely. It's just like, and you say, well, God, I guess I can't trust myself because now I'm walking this path in the woods and I don't feel anything. I'm just, everything that happens in life is an opportunity for a meaningful opportunity for something. We also can corrupt the human experience by demanding that it be a certain way, that it show up a certain way, that you walk the path on Monday and you feel enlightened and you walk it on Wednesday, you feel like shit. And but sometimes that's just a lived human experience. Don't categorize everything as right or wrong or good or bad. The Buddha said there's 10,000 joys and there's 10,000 sorrows. No amount of spirituality is going to change that. So your life becomes a space of hospitality. You make a space of hospitality for the entirety of what shows up.
Yeah, and I think we're used to religion being very prescriptive.
Yes.
Just teach 7th grade boys in Sunday school, and they would the answer to every question was go to church, read your Bible, and pray. No matter what the question was.
Right.
They thought that, but I found out adults sometimes prescribe that same thing. Even when you don't feel like it, do your morning quiet time and do it this way, and go to church. Make sure you're going to church, even when you don't feel like it. But that wasn't necessarily meeting my deepest needs or helping me evolve, helping me get further down the road on the journey. It was just conforming me to someone else's prescription.
Right. And let me just throw in there, though, to be, there are religious practices that people find meaningful, but as long as it's authentic, right? Like, like what I mean by religious, like, for example, visiting a sacred place, there are all kinds of religious experiences and practices that people authentically find meaningful, and it's not like it's my or your responsibility to, make some judgment about it. The main thing is that it's authentic to that person.
Right. I like centering prayer, for example. Which is
great example.
Old Catholic, it's real old Catholic.
John Keating
practice.
And Thomas Merton.
Yeah. And it's just really helpful for me to do that, to be still and to be quiet and not ask for anything and just listen and be. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying. We're already running out of time. unfortunately. Talk about, the things you're thinking about, the things you're working on. Maybe if you have a project that you're working on, or the things you've just been thinking about. And then we also need to know where we can find you, where people can find you, and so on. We want to state that on the program.
Yeah. So, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. The Center for Non-Religious Spirituality is a place where you can find me. I guess maybe Facebook is the easiest place to start. The Center for Non-Religious Spirituality. So my involvement with like the American Humanist Association, for example, I discovered that sometimes there is a failure to appreciate spirituality for fear that it is going to become or be religious or some kind of supernatural related thing,
Mm-hmm.
And so I started noticing that among a lot of humanists and atheists that because toxic religion has had an impact on so many people, even the idea of spirituality is suspect or
Mm-hmm.
is not well understood or appreciated outside the religious realm,
Right.
And so I started training people to be non-religious spiritual directors. Spiritual direction is traditionally a religious office or religious profession,
Mm-hmm.
Has its roots in Catholicism primarily and is typically religious, So I started training people to do non-religious spiritual direction. That is because it's acknowledging the universal importance and relevance of spirituality and having a connection, a relationship with someone who can encourage and foster that and listen and support a person in that journey for whom their spirituality is not a religious thing.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think that to just switch from being pro-religious, a religious follower, and then just switching sides and being against religion, although it's understandable and for a period of time, that's kind of what happens. You just kind of like, you go to the other side,
Mm-hmm.
And you rail on religion, which I'm not judging people for. It's a part of the process. It's even a necessary part of the process to give voice to your dissent and your frustration and anger against a system that was very abusive or damaging to you. So it makes sense. But you don't want to get stuck there. Like there's other places to cultivate beyond just the anti-religious kind of sentiment. One thing that's fascinating is that Jesus is a person of great interest. Even people who leave religion, like inevitably the posts I do about Jesus are the most, even on Facebook, or the most, shared and so on. And I started a project some years back called the Religion Free Bible, the RFB. And I just didn't have time to finish it, but even close to finish it. The Bible's
It's a big book.
But one of the projects I'm kind of toying around with is going back and at least doing the Gospels, and rewriting them and as the religious free Bible. I already have several I've kind of written over the years. It's just I've never really picked it up and continued with it.
Yeah.
So I guess
that'd be exciting to read in some circles and make you the big enemy for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. And the thing is that speaking of that, is that a lot of people dislike me because I'm not Christian enough, and then there's people who don't like me because I'm too Christian for them. You know,
sure.
And so, like for example, my understanding of Jesus is a total defiance of Orthodox Christianity on the one hand, but I'm not in the camp where I deny the historicity of Jesus, and I have my reasons for that. And, you know, Carl Jung, for example, believed that symbols of transformation are some of the most meaningful and powerful tools that we have for self-actualization. And the legend of Jesus, if you might use those words, because we know very little about Jesus really, we only really know mostly from the Gospels, and they're roughly about the same thing, most of them, 3 of them anyway. So, but there is something about that, the symbol of Jesus, like even lately as I've been watching these football playoffs, I think it's the Latter-day Saints. Again, they've got some real, have you seen they've got these great commercials about how Jesus gets us. Jesus gets everyone.
Right.
That is such a great message. It just kills me. Now, I'm assuming it's Latter-day Saints. I don't know for sure. I've not looked into it far enough. But I loved what the message is, which is that, look, Jesus is one of us. Jesus gets us. Like, I think that message still has a lot of staying power for people. I don't know. I can't explain why that is exactly. I mean, like, Jesus isn't the only one, right? Like Buddha's another one, Martin Luther King. I mean, we could go down a list of people who have been deeply meaningful symbols of self-actualization. And it could be that the idea of Jesus being both divine and human, the fusion of those two together as one is that symbol of a coming into the fullness of what we are, and so on. So I don't know. A very long answer to a simple question is the Center for Non-Religious Spirituality is really a big focus of mine. I think we still need spiritual directors that can work in this space. Spiritual direction is different from counseling, from therapy, from life coaching, from pastoral counseling. You can get certified in it. I think it's a needed role in sort of the spectrum of mental health and life wholeness, sort of like opportunities for people, and so, but I appreciate you having me on. Let's do it again sometime. There's always more to talk to that we can do in an hour. So
I've had experience with spiritual direction and focusing, and just a lot of experience with that. And I'm all in on focusing and that kind of listening that helps us, feel what we need to feel so that we can heal and so on. And like you said, we could talk about that for a long time. Real quickly, though, I always ask everybody, what would you put on your billboard if you had a big billboard that everyone in the world could see? What would your phrase or your sentence or your whatever would you put on that billboard?
I don't know. I got a few, but the one that just crosses my mind right now is don't leave love left undone. Don't leave love left undone. Like, there's a lot of things that we may not accomplish a lot in life. There might be a lot of dreams that we don't have the opportunity to fulfill. There may be some goals that we never get to. There may be dreams and aspirations, but don't leave love left undone. That's the one thing you don't want to do. You don't want to leave the world having not loved as fully as you could. In fact, if a person is looking for a very simple way to find meaning in life, you could just ask yourself this question, and you wouldn't have to answer another question for the rest of your life to find meaning. And that would be, What does it mean for me right now to be loved? You can ask that question every minute of every day. Now, that's not saying that the answer is always easy, right? Like, what does it mean for me right now to be loved with this person I need to set a boundary with this person, whatever the situation is? But that's the right question to always be asking that. Like when you leave this world and you look back, it's going to be love that I think we have the most control over in terms of living a life of fullness without regret. Don't leave love left undone. It's the one mistake you don't want to make in life. You can make all kinds of other mistakes, but that's one you really don't want to.
Right. Good. Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for being on the program. We appreciate it.
Yeah. We'll do it again sometime.
All of you out there listening, Jim Palmer, ladies and gentlemen, we wish we had an applause machine here, but I've waited, I've been looking forward to this, and you didn't disappoint me. It was good. So, but for those of you out there, we encourage you to keep abreast of what we're doing. We're going to be interviewing next month. We've been interviewing about trauma, but next month we're going to be interviewing people, and we're calling it Things We Don't Understand. We're going to be talking to someone that identifies as post-Christian, someone that's a tarot reader, and some things like that, all those things we don't understand. But until then, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary. We hope you find who you are as you embark on your own journey.
For all of us here at the Desert Sanctuary, be who you are, be where you are, and be at peace.